Hey YouTube, coming at you today with my second. I guess I'm going to do these every other day. I'm not quite as industrious as Inglorious Bettas is, but I'm going to do these every other day, and I'm going to try to do them every other day. I wanted to clear up some mistakes that I have made in the past few videos talking about these Teleocichlas. There's in the early 90s I had reached the point where I was actually starting to function as a fish keeper as opposed to just slamming around and not really knowing what I was doing, which is basically what we all do when we first start out keeping fish. And by the early 90s, I had kind of reached my stride. I was beginning to be able to keep fish and have them thrive. And that's a really good feeling. And of course, I tried to expand my horizons continuously. I started going to local fish stores in Dallas, and at the time in Dallas and Plano, where I lived in Texas, there was a phenomenal number of fish stores. Zebra plecos were available then, and just a plethora of cichlid species were available. And I went to my local fish store in Plano, which was a really good store, and found a wild-caught shipment of little juvenile cichlids that had just come in. And after studying them a little bit, I recognized a contaminant in the mix. And if you reach a point where you can really kind of see your cichlids and what they should look like, if you go through wild caughts, oftentimes, and more so back then I suppose, oftentimes you will find fish that are not the fish that is being sold as contaminants in a wild caught group. And the more I studied, the more I realized there was 5 contaminants in that tank. And my curiosity being what it was at the time, I had to know what those fish were. I knew I had something that I didn't recognize and that I hadn't seen anywhere. So I took them home. I bought them and I took them home, and I started raising them up. And I started doing my due diligent research and trying to figure out what they were. They looked very much like the cichlids that were in the tank, like the other juveniles that were in the tank, only these had barring on them that didn't belong on the other fish. And as I am wont, I expanded my search parameters. I started reaching out to people in my local club that I was a member of. I was a member of the Texas Cichlid Association at that time, which was a really good group. And anybody that lives in Texas, I highly recommend that they join, if it's still there, and I think it is. I was a ACA member at that time, and I tried reaching out to people that I knew that were part of the ACA, and I was getting nowhere. And the type of personality that I am, when I get nowhere, that just forces me to try harder. And so I began scouring every store, every book, every expert, anybody that I could find, and I could not find them. Could not recognize. Juveniles are always hard to recognize. So eventually my search led me to 2 really good people. One was David Schlesser, who was the curator at that time of the Dallas Aquarium. And I think David is now pretty much staying in South America. I've seen several videos of him with other people in South America, so I think he's pretty much, at that time he was doing some really excellent research on desert fish that are found in little waterways in the desert. And the other person that my search finally netted was Sven Kullander, an ichthyologist in Europe, the Netherlands, I believe. And I pestered Sven via email about this contaminant that I had found, and of course he couldn't tell me what it was. You know, here's this crazy American writing him continuously about trying to figure out exactly what this fish is, and of course my knowledge base wasn't deep enough to understand fin counts and scale counts and actually figure out exactly what it is. And by this time these fish had gotten, 2-3 inches, and they were starting to show some of their adult coloration. And I contacted David Schlesser. He was very gracious, and Sven Kullander was very gracious to me too, even though he really couldn't help me and was kind of at a loss as to what to do with this idiot American that kept emailing him about these fish. I contacted David Schlesser. I said, David, could I bring these fish down to you so that you could help me identify exactly what they are? And he said, sure, I'll take some time out. You bring them in a bag and we'll look at them and see if we can figure out what they are. So I took them to David. For me it was a really big deal to meet somebody of his stature and to actually have the face-to-face meeting with him and get a little bit of his time. I got to walk through the underbelly of the Dallas Aquarium, which was really wonderful. It was eye-opening to me to see what actually went on. And when I showed David my fish, he smiled and said, yes, I know exactly what they are. And I was so overjoyed. I'm sure that I got a beaming look on my face. And he said, they're Tilapia Merriam. I'm probably mispronouncing that Latin second name. And I said, cool, they're tilapia. And he said, yes, and they're illegal. And I said, what do you mean? He said, I'm going to have to take them from you. And I'm sure the crestfallen look on my face was terrible. And I said, well, David, can I get a permit to do this, to keep these fish? And he said, well, you could if you were well enough versed in the scientific nomenclature to actually keep these fish, and you could get someone to sign off. And I said, well, you can see how healthy they are. I've taken really good care of them. Can you sign off on me? He said, I don't know you from Adam. And of course, I ended up turning my fish in. And the reason I'm saying this is because doing a little research on these Teleocichlas, I have gotten out the most complete colored lexicon of cichlids by Dr. Herbert R. Axelrod, which came out in '93. And on page 705 of this massive volume, you will find in the Crincichla area, not Crinchilla, yet another thing that I've mispronounced, Teleocichla Monogramma. This fish was described by Sven O. Kullander in 1988, based upon a holotype about 2.5 inches in SL without the tail from the upper Xingu River in Brazil. It was probably a female, which means it might have been an immature specimen. The name under which Kullander described the fish was Teleocichla Monogramma. The suggested new genus, Teleocichla, has been rejected by students of these fishes. The fish is unknown in the aquarium. So even in '93, this fish was well known, and I've since discovered that it was in '88 that Sven Kullander split this fish. Now, if you read Dr. Axelrod's work, of which there are many, you will learn from him that he too took ichthyology classes when he was a young man in the 40s, and that he learned that ichthyology is pretty much down to two groups, the lumpers and the splitters. And from his little blurb there, we can infer that Dr. Axelrod was a lumper, not a splitter, and that Sven Kullander was a splitter, not a lumper. But fast forward to 2017, Sven Kullander was right. These fish have been split. They're not crincichlas, so much so that it's obvious. I don't know the exact ichthyology. I'm sure better minds than mine can explain it clearly to you, but these fish show enough difference from crincichlas to deserve the splitting that Sven Kullander gave them. And I just am covering this because I think that it's important that people understand that this is a constantly evolving hobby. The ichthyologists, the scientists, the collectors are all out there pushing the envelope in this hobby. And because of that, things that we've taken for granted for decades don't necessarily stay that way. The ichthyology work gets done, the DNA, the skeletal, the fin ray counts, the scale counts, all come in finally, and it's easily seen that these fish do not represent members of the species that they were originally clad in, or even the subspecies sometimes. So that's my little addition today for my Inglorious Bettas daily challenge. Good luck, you two.